Okay, so you say that you don't know any racist churches.
Right.
But church, okay, so there's like, it's basically like there's white churches and black churches.
Yeah.
And not a lot of crossover.
Okay.
Right?
Yes, I think
at least where we live, that's the way it is.
I think that's true. I think there's you have white churches, black churches, Hispanic churches,
right?
Korean churches, Chinese churches. Like there's, I think it does get divided up along those lines quite often.
So why?
Well, one, there's a long history of white churches and black churches.
Yes.
And so, and if we go, I know we're talking about today, but if we're going back to, let's say the 1800s, and when there are churches, and even back, when the slaves are allowed to gather for church, okay, and they would come actually to like the same church grounds, but they would be in a different building. They would be in another part of the building. They would, it was segregated out at that point. And I think during that time of why churches were segregated out during slavery period, I think what happened was that the blacks created their own culture within, like, their own church culture. Same way whites had their kind of their own church culture. This is what it looked like. Blacks did as well. And so you had,
so it's a different way to do church.
Yeah. And so I think out of that, they were segregated.
Yeah.
And then they created their own cultures in that. And then
that persisted.
So it just kept going.
Okay.
See, there's long history of white churches, there's long history of black churches. And I think it largely remains that way today, not because of racism, but because of preferences to that culture. You were raised in that type of church culture. And I think that's also why charismatic or Pentecostal churches have been like one of the few, main groups of churches, put it that way, who have thrived in being very racially diverse in their congregations. Because
which churches have?
Like charismatic or Pentecostal churches. Okay. Because what happens a lot in those charismatic or Pentecostal churches, the music can appeal, the music style can be appealing to blacks, to Hispanics, to whites altogether. The preaching style can be conducive for or appealing to, a racially diverse group. Okay. And so I think that's why charismatic or Pentecostal churches have probably done the best job at becoming multiracial churches. Whereas like your mainline white Protestant churches, your Lutherans, your Methodists, your Baptists, they're not very appealing, if I'm being quite honest, for a lot of African American individuals. And the same thing for black churches. It's not always appealing if you're coming from a white Protestant church background. So they're just stylistically, it's just so different. Okay. So
it's not because, so it's not because we don't want you here.
Correct. Okay. Yeah, and I think probably from both sides, white and black churches, black churches, they probably would say we would like to have a more diverse representation on Sunday mornings. But it's just, I think it's very difficult to get there because, again, of the preferential styles.